As part of the Railway Museum's 50th birthday celebrations, and as part of York Unlocked, few of us were lucky enough to enter the museum's library archive. Due to the delicate nature of the artefacts there, the archives are normally off limits, but in those vast stores are tens of thousands of photos. Some are visually stunning, while others tell a slightly more dire tale. The 8th of October 1952 was to many a miserable day. The first nips of winter were beginning to bite, and a thick fog had enveloped most of London and the surrounding areas. In weather like this, it was common for British Rail to use a fogman. These were men that positioned themselves at home signals or their detonators so that crews could have an audio-visual cue for the danger ahead. It was usually the signaller's call to go into what was known as fog working, and it normally happened when visibility dropped to either less than 200 yards or where the signaller couldn't see the signal. In Harrow, signaller Mr. Armitage recorded in the register at 6:35 a.m. that fog operation was in effect. But either side of the Harrow signal box, at Hatch End and at Wembley, both were not immediately in fog operation yet, but would be later in the day. Things were running as expected on the morning shift, and other than the weather, it was business as usual. The 7:31 local train from Tring set off on time, despite the weather. However, the fog forced the driver to slow. It was a common but vital train, as it covered a large residential area to Euston, and given its popularity, its lateness would not only cause a string of complaints from disgruntled passengers late for work, but its delay would impact the other trains behind it. Unfortunately, the train left Watford and was accepted by Harrow 5 minutes late. The signaller switched it to the fast up line. It was a normal, by-the-book move and freed up the other slower lines in the station, where the local would inevitably stop to service passengers. The signaller put the dial to train in section and made a small amendment to the train register at 8:10 to advise fog operation ceasing as the weather appeared to clear. He then set the home signal to danger, protecting the train. Meanwhile, further up the line, the Perth Express bound for London was speeding through the countryside. It too had a timetable to keep, and the weather had made it late. The Coronation-class City of Glasgow had taken over the train on its last leg, and the crew were looking at every angle they could, short of speeding, to make up the time. But it were no good. The train was nearly an hour and a half late. Another train making up lost time was the Liverpool Express from Euston. This time, fog would play no part in its delay, but a vacuum issue, most likely a damaged seal on the hose. The guard quickly fixed the issue, and after a quick continuity test to ensure all the brakes were applying, they set off. Back with Harrow signal box, as the local train had just barely settled into the platform, when Armitage received the bell of a train approaching. He had just accepted the Liverpool train, and surmised the only one to come was the Perth Express, so he accepted it. He had a clear, fast up outer line available, so in theory, the train should sail through while the Liverpool would pass on the down line. He then set his fast outer indicator to danger, and again, in a busy area such as Harrow, this was textbook behaviour. But before he could do anything else, he heard the sound of an engine. The Perth Express had sped past the outer home signal, and in doing so was on the wrong line. It then passed 2 further danger signals, and Armitage watched helplessly as the Perth Express hit the back of the local. Seconds later, despite Armitage's attempts to stop it, the double-headed Liverpool Express would also hit the wreckage, adding more to the carnage. From the local arriving to the station to the Perth train hitting the rear coach took all of 1.5 minutes. Calls for aid went out straight away, but clearly overwhelmed with the number of casualties, the emergency services also took help from a local American Air Force medical unit, which were stationed nearby, the Salvation Army, and the Women's Voluntary Service. The wreck had severed many major power lines, causing several small fires, adding additional hazards to the recovery efforts. The platform had been packed with hundreds of people, and over 340 people had to receive some form of treatment. Hospitals became overwhelmed with the injured, and triage stations were set up to cope with the injuries and the shock. The emergency services worked through the night freeing people from the carriages, but by 1:30 a.m. it was concluded that there were no further survivors. 112 people would lose their lives in the disaster. The majority of the dead were railway staff heading to work, but also included the crew of the Perth train and the driver from the leading engine on the Liverpool train. So what went wrong? The subsequent investigation focused mainly on the signalling. The points were examined, and although the line was badly damaged due to the crash, it was found that the points and the signalling was in perfect condition. The actions of the signaller at Harrow and the other signal boxes that were adjacent were also cleared of any wrongdoing. That left the crew of the Perth train. The signaller confirmed that he had seen the train pass the box, but neither the driver or the fireman had made any attempts to stop. Despite having run through several signals at danger and having run over detonators that were put on the point in an attempt to stop the engine, the wreck of the engine and the damaged tracks also told the same story, with the brakes only being applied about a second before impact. Cause was put partly on the crew of the Perth train, but mostly on the weather. While the fog was clearing, it was plausible that the crew couldn't see the signals, and in the fog, it was also suggested that both the driver and the fireman had lost their bearings, and they were not sure where they were on the line. That would account for them not looking out for signals, and the fact that they failed to stop until the very last second. Unfortunately, we'll never really know. In light of the disaster, a report recommended the implementation of a warning signal system that would sit in all cabs. The automatic warning system would cover almost a third of British rail track and was rather simple. The system worked by detecting different magnetic fields dependent on the signal being shown and would alert the driver with an audio and visual cue. If the signal was clear, then a bell would sound, but if the signal is at caution or danger, then a loud, continuous alarm would sound. The driver must acknowledge the alarm by way of a button, otherwise the train's brakes would apply, bringing the train to a stop. In addition, the dial on the front would be an amber aspect. Because of its shape, the drivers nicknamed them sunflowers. It wasn't foolproof, as the driver could, in theory, pass a signal at danger if they acknowledged the AWS, but it was a lot better than just relying on visual markers, and as a secondary point, it also solved, in part, the issue of running in fog. Today, fog is still one of the leading causes for train delays and cancellations. Having in-cab signalling helps lessen delays. However, there is a proportion of the network that still rely on the more traditional methods of signalling. With some manned crossings and areas of the line where visibility is paramount, speed restrictions is the only reliable method of keeping people safe. Railway detonators are not used for fog and are more used to protect trains or people working. At the time of writing, it would have been 73 years to the day that the accident occurred, and still remains the worst peacetime railway crash in British history. The station still stands and is a part of the Transport for London network. On the outer wall there is a memorial, and every year the people are remembered, as well as the lessons learned when it comes to the dangers of the weather.